I came home for my grandpa's memorial, and my mom's new husband said he was the man of the house now. But I made sure it was registered in my name years ago, so I gathered proof and took the house back in court. I walked into my childhood home for my grandpa's memorial, carrying the weight of a funeral and 11 years of absence. But instead of comfort, I was met with a punch to the face from my mom's new husband. And in that moment, as the sting blossomed on my cheek, I knew one thing with chilling clarity. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The sound was a flat, sharp crack in the hallway of the house I grew up in. A punch, a slap, fast and hard across my left cheek. Bourbon fumes rolled off my mother's new husband, Rick, like heat off asphalt in August. "Welcome home," he slurred. I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't say a word. I just stood there in the doorway of my dead father's house, holding my carry-on bag with both hands, feeling the heat bloom across my cheekbone. And I thought one thing with perfect, crystalline clarity. He just made the biggest mistake of his life. My mother stood at the top of the stairs in her housecoat watching. Our eyes met for exactly 1 second, long enough for me to see the flicker of shame cross her face. Then she closed her bedroom door. I'd flown back to Ohio on a Tuesday evening, 11 years away, 2 suitcases, one with clothes, one with legal documents. I hadn't come home to grieve. I hadn't come to reconnect. I'd come because my grandmother called me at 7 o'clock in the morning while I was reviewing quarterly audit reports in my Manhattan office. And she said 4 words in a voice that was paper thin but iron steady. "You need to see this. My name is Claire Matt. I'm 30 years old. I'm a senior forensic auditor at one of the top financial intelligence firms in New York. I have a master's degree in accounting, for years of active military service, and the kind of reputation in my field that means partners twice my age return my calls on the first ring. I am also the daughter of Sergeant First Class David Matt, United States Army, 2 tours in Iraq, Purple Heart recipient, amateur woodworker, and the best man I have ever known. He died when I was 18. Roadside IED. They told us on a Wednesday. By then, I had already taken my first semester of college tuition money and used it to help Mom make the mortgage payment on the house he'd bought with his veteran's loan. Mom was devastated, completely hollowed out. She could barely make coffee in the morning, let alone navigate bank paperwork, property taxes, and a mortgage she'd never had to think about while Dad was alive. So I handled it. I was 18 years old and I handled it, because that's what soldiers' kids do. We adapt. We solve. I co-signed the mortgage. I helped restructure the payment plan. And because I had just taken my first contract law elective at Ohio State, and my grandfather, my mother's father, 68 years old, sharp as a tack, a retired county clerk who had spent 40 years watching people get cheated by fine print, because he sat beside me at the bank and said quietly into my ear, "Read everything, Claire. Every word. And then add your own words." I added a clause, a military service clause. Standard language, actually borrowed from a VA housing document Grandpa had saved in a binder labeled "Keep Forever." The clause stated that if I was on active military duty, any transfer of my ownership interest in the property required my explicit written consent, notarized, filed with the county. I served 4 years. Never gave consent. Never even knew I needed to. I put the original documents in a fireproof lockbox in my grandmother's basement when I left for basic training at 19. I forgot about them. The way you forget about insurance policies, trusting that they exist, trusting that you won't need them, trusting that the world won't require you to use them. The world required me to use them. The flight from LaGuardia to Columbus took 2 hours and 11 minutes. I know because I timed it, sitting rigid in my window seat, watching the flat Ohio farmland expand beneath me like something being unwrapped. I hadn't been back. Not once in 11 years. Not for Thanksgiving. Not for Christmas. Not even when Mom married Rick Carlton 3 years ago and sent me an invitation with a note that said, "Please come. It would mean so much." I'd sent a card and a check and my regrets. I regretted the regrets now. I rented a silver Honda Accord at the airport and drove to Maple Street on muscle memory alone. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered. The houses closer together, the trees shorter, the yards less impressive. Everything does that when you've been gone long enough. It shrinks. But the house at 1247 Maple looked wrong in a way that had nothing to do with memory. Dad's garden, the one he'd planted with heirloom tomatoes and climbing roses and a ridiculous amount of marigolds because he read somewhere that they kept pests away, was gone, replaced with white gravel and a plastic bird bath. Dad's basketball hoop, the one he'd installed for my 13th birthday, helping me get the pole perfectly level with a torpedo level and a patience I didn't appreciate at the time, had vanished without a trace. Even the old oak tree in the side yard looked wrong. Half its branches were gone, pruned back aggressively, probably because they'd grown over Rick's new garage addition. The mailbox read Carlton, not Matt. I sat in the rental car for a full 3 minutes. Then I got out and walked to the front door and knocked. Mom answered. Smaller than I remembered. Grayer. She pulled me into a hug that felt like an obligation fulfilled rather than a reunion. And over her shoulder, through the open hallway, I saw what he'd done to the inside. Dad's recliner reupholstered in camouflage fabric. Dad's custom-built bookshelves gone, replaced with particle board units from Walmart. One of them visibly sagging under the weight of Rick's hunting trophies. Family photos gone, replaced with mounted deer heads and a collection of bass fishing plaques. And in the downstairs bathroom I saw it when I excused myself to use it 20 minutes later. A Confederate flag shower curtain in the bathroom my father had tiled by hand. My father, who'd bled in Fallujah for this country. I stood in that bathroom for a long moment, looking at that shower curtain, and I felt something lock into place inside me. Something cold and precise and very, very focused. That night, after Rick hit me and Mom closed her door, I didn't sleep. I lay on the pull-out couch in what used to be my bedroom, now crammed with Rick's bowling trophies and hunting gear, smelling of cigarettes and mildew, and I worked. First, photos. I propped my phone against a water bottle and photographed my face from 6 different angles. The handprint was still clearly visible on my cheekbone, reddish-purple against my skin, stark and damning under the flashlight. I took close-ups. I took wide shots, showing the room for context. I noted the time on each one, 11:47 p.m., Tuesday. Then I opened my legal app and filed a detailed incident report. Date, time, location, description of the assault, description of my mother's response, description of the physical evidence, time-stamped, automatically uploaded to my secure cloud account. Then I texted my assistant, Maya, in New York. Need you to contact Morrison and Associates, first thing Monday. Jonathan Morrison, specifically. Tell him it's Claire Matt. He'll know who I am. Property dispute in Ohio. Hostile environment. Possible assault charges. I'll send documentation in the morning. Then I sat quietly in the dark and thought about my grandfather and about everything he taught me. And I made a list. Everything I needed. Everything I was going to do. Then I drove to Grandma's house. She was awake, of course, 81 years old and sharp as a brand new blade, sitting at her kitchen table in a quilted housecoat with a cup of chamomile tea and a look on her face that said she'd been expecting me since the moment I landed. Tell me everything, she said. I did. And when I finished, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine and said, Jonathan Morrison will be at the memorial. I already called him. He's expecting you. Of course she had. Jonathan Morrison had been my grandfather's lawyer for 40 years. He was 63, lean, silver-haired, with the kind of quiet authority that comes from decades of being right in rooms full of people who thought they were smarter than him. He found me at the reception after the memorial, where I was standing near the back, holding a cup of terrible coffee, and watching Rick drink from a flask. He wasn't even trying to hide. Claire, he said, extending his hand. Your grandmother said you might need me. I need more than that, I said, but you'll do for a start. I handed him my phone. He scrolled through everything. The photos, the incident report, the property records I'd pulled that morning showing the deed transfer, the mortgage statements I'd photographed in Rick's desk drawer while he was out, 3 months of missed payments sitting there in a pile like a confession. His expression didn't change. That's how I knew it was as bad as I thought. How soon? I asked. Monday morning, he said. First thing. We can file an emergency injunction to freeze all property transfers pending review. Given the assault documentation, he paused, studying a photo, we could potentially file an emergency protective order today. No, I said. I want this done right. Completely. Irrefutably. I want there to be no question, no ambiguity, no crack for his lawyer to wedge open. Morrison nodded slowly. Your grandfather always said you were the smart one, he said. He was right about most things, I said. Tell me what you need. What happened next was 4 days of the most focused, methodical work I have ever done in my life. And I once spent 3 weeks reconstructing a $40 million embezzlement scheme from corrupted backup files. This was personal, which made it sharper. On Wednesday, I drove to the county courthouse and pulled every record associated with 1247 Maple Street. The original purchase agreement from 2009, the mortgage documents, the deed transfer from 14 months ago when Mom signed the house into joint ownership with Rick, the home equity loan from 2 years prior, $40,000 taken against the property's value. I photographed every page. Then I drove to a title company 2 towns over, one where I didn't know anyone and no one would recognize my name. And I paid $75 for a full title history report. It confirmed what I already suspected. My name was still listed in the county records, specifically in the mortgage covenant documents, book 447, page 281, as a co-obligor with a conditional interest subject to existing claims as recorded in county records. Rick's lawyer had never checked page 281, or they'd checked it and didn't understand what they were looking at. Either way, amateur hour. On Thursday, I went back to the house while Rick was at what Mom called his usual Thursday, which turned out to be the sports bar on Route 9 where he spent most afternoons. I told Mom I was getting my remaining belongings. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe, or something older and harder than guilt. I went to Rick's office, Dad's study. The custom built-in shelves Dad had spent an entire summer constructing, cherry wood, dovetail joints, perfectly level, were gone. Crowbar marks gouged into the original plaster where they'd been ripped out. Rick had replaced them with a particle board unit from Walmart, one shelf already bowing. Rick's diplomas hung where Dad's service photos used to be, an associate degree in business management from an online college, a forklift operator certification from 2009. His desk was my grandfather's desk. Dad had spent 3 weekends refinishing it, stripping back decades of old varnish and bringing the walnut grain back to life. It was now covered in cigarette burns and drink rings. I photographed everything. Then I opened his filing cabinet with the key I'd found tucked under the desk blotter. Rick was not, it turned out, particularly creative about security. Inside, pawn shop receipts organized by date, rubber-banded into quarterly stacks. A receipt from Buckeye Pawn on Henderson Road dated 14 months ago. 1 military medal, purple. Heart, gold detail. $50. $50. My father's Purple Heart. $50. I photographed every receipt. There were 31 of them. Dad's combat knife, $35. My grandmother's pearl earrings, $40. A coin collection my grandfather had spent 40 years assembling, $200 for the lot. Behind the receipts, mortgage statements showing 3 missed payments. Property tax notices, overdue by $2,200. Credit card statements in Mom's name with $18,000 in charges she'd clearly never authorized. And at the back of the drawer, tucked inside a manila envelope labeled MISK, the home equity loan documents. Mom's signature on the loan was wrong. Not subtly wrong. Dramatically, obviously wrong. My mother's handwriting is small, precise, slightly left-leaning. 30 years of secretarial work had made it automatic. The signature on the loan document was large, rushed, slanting right. I had a notarized copy of Mom's actual signature from the original 2009 mortgage documents in my bag. I set them side by side and photographed them together. Then I called Morrison. "We have forgery," I said. "How clear?" "Clear enough that I could see it, and I'm not a handwriting expert." "I know one," he said. "Dr. Patricia Chin, certified forensic document examiner. 22 years, testified in federal court. I'll get her on the phone." By Friday afternoon, Morrison had assembled what he called the cleanest property fraud case I've seen in 30 years of practice. Those were his exact words. He said them quietly, professionally, with the same tone other people used to say, "This patient has 6 months to live." Precise. Final. Here is what we had. The original mortgage documents with my co-signing clause still valid, never released, never acknowledged in the deed transfer. The forged loan application, confirmed in writing by Dr. Patricia Chin, who reviewed the signature photographs and provided a 2-page analysis, concluding with the phrase, "It is my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty, that these signatures were not produced by the same individual." 31 pawn shop receipts, documenting the systematic sale of family property. 3 months of missed mortgage payments. $2,200 in overdue property taxes. Time-stamped photographs of the assault on my face. A formal incident report filed through my legal app with GPS metadata, confirming location. And because my grandmother was 81 years old and had spent 60 of those years watching people fail to prepare for exactly this kind of moment. Copies of every original document from the original 2009 closing, kept in a fireproof box in her basement, exactly where I'd left them at 19. We filed the emergency injunction Monday morning at 8:47 a.m. Judge Carol Harrison, 26 years on the bench in Franklin County, known for a zero-tolerance approach to property fraud and elder financial exploitation, reviewed our evidence binder for 12 minutes. 12 minutes. "Injunction granted," she said. "All property transfers frozen pending full review. The defendant is barred from the property at 1247 Maple Street pending the outcome of these proceedings." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Ms. Matt, I'm also issuing an emergency protective order in light of the documented assault. If Mr. Carlton comes within 300 feet of you, he goes directly to jail." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me. Thank whoever taught you to keep paperwork." "My grandfather," I said. She nodded once. "Smart man." We drove to Maple Street with Sheriff's Deputy Elena Martinez. 12 years on the force, recommended by Morrison as someone who had zero patience for exactly this kind of situation, following in a cruiser behind us. Rick's truck was in the driveway. "Good." He answered the door in a stained t-shirt and sweatpants, a beer in his hand at 10:15 in the morning. He saw Martinez in uniform and Morrison in his suit, and something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite fear, not yet. Then he saw me, and it became fear. "We have a court order," Martinez said, stepping forward and presenting the injunction. "You've been served, Mr. Carlton." "This is," Rick said, but his voice had lost its volume. It came out thin. "This is my house, Mr. Carlton," Morrison said pleasantly. "I'd encourage you to contact an attorney before you say anything further." I walked past Rick into the house. Martinez followed. Rick trailed us, escalating. "You can't do this. She abandoned this property. She walked away. I want a lawyer. This isn't legal." Until Martinez turned and said, with the flat calm of someone who has said this approximately 4,000 times, "Sir, stop talking. Get a lawyer. Stand over there." He stopped talking. He stood over there. I went to his office and opened the filing cabinet and took out the evidence we'd already photographed. Then I looked at Rick, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and his jaw working silently, and I held up the pawn shop receipts. 31 items, I said, including my father's Purple Heart. $50, Rick. You sold his Purple Heart for $50. Those were Lydia's. She said I could. She couldn't. They weren't hers. Mom appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd been listening. I could tell from her face that she hadn't known about all of it. The receipts, the scope of it. She was gripping the banister with both hands. "There's also the matter of the home equity loan," Morrison said, addressing Rick with the same pleasantness a doctor uses to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "The one your wife didn't sign? The one with the forged signature." The beer can dropped from Rick's hand. It hit the hardwood floor and rolled, leaving a dark, wet arc. "The loan is fraudulent," Morrison continued, which means the $40,000 was obtained illegally, which means in addition to the property fraud charges, we're also looking at forgery, wire fraud, and elder financial exploitation. She's not elderly, Rick blurted. My client's mother is 63, Morrison said. Ohio statute defines elder financial exploitation as targeting individuals 55 and older. She qualifies. Rick's face cycled through red, then purple, then something approaching white. You can't. He turned to me. You can't do this. This is my home. 3 years. I've been here 3 years. You've been in it 3 years, I said. That's not the same thing. I picked up my bag from where I'd set it by the door. Here's what happens next, I said. Morrison files the civil suit today. The DA gets our documentation this afternoon. I spoke with Assistant District Attorney Kevin Briggs this morning. He's been briefed. There will be criminal charges. Your assets are frozen. You have approximately 48 hours before this property legally reverts to the original ownership structure, with protections that will prevent this from happening again. Rick looked at me with something that wasn't anger anymore. It was something worse. Naked animal calculation. Trying to find the exit in a room that had no exits. I didn't know about the clause, he said finally, quietly almost to himself. I know, I said. Your lawyer should have checked page 281 of the county records. Book 447. It's clearly referenced in the deed transfer documents. I tilted my head. Did your lawyer check the deed transfer documents? His silence answered the question. My grandfather, I said, spent 40 years as a county clerk watching people sign things they didn't read and lose things they never should have lost. I picked up my bag. He taught me to read everything twice and then add my own words. I walked to the door. Martinez fell in beside me. Behind me, I heard Rick say something. It was quiet, and it wasn't to me. I think it was to himself, or to the room, or to whatever version of his life he'd constructed in this house that was currently collapsing around him. I stepped out into the November sunlight. The yard looked wrong without Dad's garden. It would look right again. I'd already called a landscape architect. Morrison came out behind me, rolling his sleeve back down over his watch. DA's office confirmed. They'll process the criminal complaint by end of day, he said. You should expect an arrest within 72 hours. Good. Claire, he paused. What you found in the walls. Are you going to tell me what it was? I looked at him. Not yet, I said. Here is what I hadn't told anyone. On Saturday morning, while the contractors were doing the initial walkthrough assessment, I'd hired James Okafor of Okafor Construction, whose grandfather had served with my father and who had driven 3 hours from Columbus. Because when Tom Rodriguez called and explained the situation, James said, I'll be there Saturday, without asking what it paid. James had called me down to the basement. Ms. Matt, he said, you need to see this. He'd been assessing the water damage to the east basement wall, tracing a damp patch up from the floor joists. He'd pulled back a section of original drywall that Rick had inexplicably never replaced or renovated. Behind it was a metal box approximately the size of a shoebox, sealed with a combination padlock. I knew the combination immediately. My birthday. Dad had used it for everything. Inside, wrapped in 2 layers of plastic sheeting and a piece of chamois cloth, his original service record. Every deployment order, every commendation, every fitness report from 22 years of service. A separate envelope containing photographs from his 2 Iraq tours that I'd never seen. 37 photos. Dad with his unit. Dad with kids in a village outside Fallujah who were holding up drawings they'd made. Dad sitting on a concrete barrier somewhere reading a letter, his face unguarded and tired and very young. A small velvet bag containing Mom's original engagement ring, the one she'd said was lost years ago, and her mother's wedding band, and a cameo brooch that had belonged to my great-grandmother. And at the very bottom, in a sealed legal envelope labeled Claire, for when you need it, a letter. I read it, standing in the cold basement while James quietly went back upstairs to give me privacy. And by the 3rd paragraph, my hands were shaking hard enough that I had to set it down on the workbench and press them flat against the wood until they stilled. I won't share everything he wrote. Some things are just mine, but I'll share this part because it matters. Claire Bear, I've set up protections. Your name is on documents your mother doesn't know about. Grandpa helped me. If something happens to me, don't let anyone take this house from her, or from you. It's more than wood and nails. It's the proof that we were here, that we built something, that we did it right. Don't let anyone erase that. Also, the engagement ring in here is for you someday, when you find someone who deserves the kind of woman you're going to become. Stay tough, soldier. Love, Dad. Rick Carlton was arrested on Wednesday at 11:23 a.m. at a bar on Route 9, in front of 7 witnesses, by Deputy Martinez and 2 officers from the Columbus PD. He was charged with forgery, wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, and assault. His bail was set at $75,000. He made bail. Then, he violated the protective order by showing up at Mom's workplace. Then, he threatened arson on camera outside the courthouse, which was, and I say this with complete sincerity, extraordinarily helpful to our case. His bail was revoked. He awaited trial from a cell. His lawyer, Bradley Simmons, called Morrison 3 times in 4 days, requesting a settlement negotiation. Morrison's response each time was the same 3 words. Read the charges. Tom Rodriguez, Master Sergeant, retired, Dad's squad leader. The man who had carried my father's body out of a burning vehicle in 2009, drove to Columbus on a Thursday and retrieved Dad's Purple Heart from Buckeye Pond. He paid exactly what the receipt said Rick had gotten for it, $50. He drove to Maple Street and handed me the small velvet case across the threshold of Dad's front door. Pawn shop owner was horrified when he found out, Tom said, practically pushed me out the door. I opened the case, looked at it, closed it again. Thank you, I managed. Your dad saved my life in Fallujah, Tom said, his voice thick. This doesn't begin to cover it. He left. I stood in the hallway holding the case, listening to the contractors working in the living room. The sound of cherrywood being fitted into the original wall brackets. Built-in shelves being restored from the photographs I'd collected. Every measurement precise, every joint tight. James appeared in the doorway, sawdust in his hair, a level in his hand. How's the fit? I asked. Perfect, he said. Your dad knew what he was doing. Yeah, I said. He did. The house took 4 weeks to restore. The hardwood floors were refinished to their original depth. The kitchen cabinets were rehung with proper hardware. The bathroom got new tile. Not Confederate flag anything. Every trace of Rick Carlton was stripped out, hauled away, gone. In the basement, James built a proper door around the hidden compartment. A real door, flush with the wall, with a brass handle and a small plaque that said DMAT 2009 in clean block letters. Mom signed the papers. She filed for divorce. She started therapy with a counselor recommended by the county's victim advocacy office. She was fragile in a way that made me furious at Rick, and deeply, complicatedly sad in a way I hadn't expected. We weren't okay yet. Probably wouldn't be for a long time. But she was in the house. Her house. With a lifetime residency clause that no future Rick Carlton could ever circumvent. Written by Morrison. Notarized. Filed with the county. Referenced in 4 separate documents in 3 different offices. I flew back to New York on a Sunday afternoon. I sat in the departure lounge at Columbus International with a cup of terrible airport coffee and Dad's Purple Heart in my carry-on bag, wrapped in the chamois cloth next to the letter. My phone buzzed. Morrison. Rick's attorney accepted our terms. Full confession, complete accounting of sold assets, full restitution to your mother. He pleads to all charges. Sentencing is at the judge's discretion, but we're looking at 5 to 7 years minimum. I put the phone down, picked up my coffee, thought about a man who had looked at everything my father built, the shelves, the floors, the garden, 22 years of service, a Purple Heart, a marriage, a daughter, and seen nothing but something to sell. Thought about how he'd looked at me in that hallway, drunk on cheap bourbon, and swung. Thought about the moment in his office when he read page 281 and the color left his face. That moment when he understood that the quiet girl who'd left for New York hadn't been running away. She'd been building a case. My flight was called. I gathered my bag. And somewhere over rural Ohio, looking down at the flat, familiar landscape through the scratched oval window, I thought about what my grandfather said every single time he handed me a document to read. Take your time, read every word, and then add your own. I did, Grandpa. I really did. This whole experience changed me forever. It made me realize the power of preparedness and the absolute importance of standing your ground. Have you ever had to fight for what's yours against seemingly insurmountable odds, especially when it involves family? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.